to Tribesy Talk. This is season 1, episode 1, where you're going to get a chance to meet Reena and Gail.
I'm Reena.
I'm Gail.
So we are in the business of social justice. And so today we're going to talk about a social justice journey. As a matter of fact, our Tribesy journey. And we're going to talk a little bit about ourselves and the work that we do in Tribesy. So Gail, what is Tribesy? Like how do we talk about the work that we do with our clients?
So we specialize in doing full organizational change using a lens, which is infuses diversity, equity, and inclusion on a structural and cultural level so that it's sustainable. And we do that intentionally to build up an organization to prepare them to move towards anti-racism.
So like most of our work is in racial equity these days. Mm-hmm. With the murder of George Floyd and things like that. Most of our work is in racial equity. But a lot of our work is around people like transforming the way people think. And so I think like a lot of people when they call us don't realize that that's what really they're calling about, mm-hmm. right? Like they think they're calling to find out these steps so that they won't have racism anymore. Instead, we show them how to transform thinking to aggressively fight racism, right? And that's a totally different sort of mindset. So,
yes. So tell people where we got our name.
You made it up.
I made it up. You made it up. But you can.
So as long as humans have been around, we've been tribing ourselves, right? So that's where the tribe comes in. And then a lot of the work we do is allowing people to try it themselves. So many times, like we'll hear people talk about, oh, there are people who have cliques and mm-hmm. they get together. And we actually see that as like protection and okay. And that it's sort of human nature to do. But what we're not doing is syncing, right? In connecting. Those tribes. We're not connecting. We have fear and all these other things that have allowed us to survive, but we're not really connecting that way. So,
and also viewing people outside of your group as the other, which is always problematic. So.
Right. So the SY is syncing. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we get Tribesy.
Yeah.
That's the pronunciation is Tribesy, not Tribesy. So that makes us unique and different, I think, in just the name mm-hmm. alone. I don't think people think of us in tribes. Like they think that's something that's just for the First Nation or indigenous mm-hmm. Cultures and other cultures, but they don't think of it in terms of themselves.
Yeah, forming groups, affinity groups, essentially.
Right, so, right. Like political groups, those are tribes. Whether people want to admit to it or not, those are tribes. So
we've been a team for a long time. And so when you hire Tribesy, you get us as a team. And we form this because for some reason, we just click.
And we're very different, right?
Yes,
we have some things in common, but we are very different. We have different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. We have different families, different geographies, different obvious differences of racial backgrounds. And we were working with other people who were people of color. You were the only white person mm-hmm. in our department. And I often wonder, did we click because I have a bias for white people? Mm. Or did we click because you have a bias for Black people? But either way, we clicked, right? So I'm just curious why you think that click happened.
I don't think we clicked necessarily we didn't click that way necessarily right away.
So when did the click happen for you? Well, I know when my click happened.
No, I mean, for me, I felt like you were somebody that I could work with right away. Mm-hmm. But you always seemed to be hanging around with other folks, mm-hmm. right? So for us to become a team, it seemed to be at some point when you made a decision that you were ready to do that. That's at least my perspective. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like our work around unconscious bias was when, for me, you started to shine. Mm-hmm. And I think it's hard for me to see a diamond in the rough. Mm. Right?
I was pretty rough.
Just because of culture and things like that. that I come from, I think it's hard for me to see a diamond in the rough. Like you want me to see you, you better shine. And not necessarily, it has its good points and obvious bad points. But I think right with unconscious bias, and when we started working on that was like, for you and I, that was like red meat for a tiger. And I think that forced you to talk more, to be active more, it was something for me that seemed to empower you about unconscious bias. And I was like, oh shit, look at that. Yeah. Yeah, she might be worthy of me.
That would be how you thought.
No, I didn't think like that. I'm just joking. But I remember that's when the click happened for me. And then I remember us just talking with other people we worked with, and I didn't have to do a lot of explaining about a lot of things with you. And there was so much with the people that we work with, there was so much explaining about everything all the time. And with you, there didn't seem to be a lot of explaining. So I tend to also gravitate around people I don't have to do a lot of explaining with. That seems to be like my belonging, my inclusion, my whatever words we want to use.
I think for me, you were ready to challenge things right off the bat. And I think that's something that we kind of both gravitated towards, when those up on high would, pass something down. The first thing we would do is think it through and challenge it and question it and use our own lens around our understanding of racial equity at the time to re-envision things. We were always trying to come up with, what's happening in our organization just isn't working. It's just not working. So that means we can't just, retool it a little bit. We need to rethink this. And we were always trying to push the envelope further, and we always kept getting pushed back. I felt like we were hitting our head against the wall lots of times, and we had that in common because you and I were always trying to push the envelope.
So specifically in social justice, because we were working in social justice in our past organization, what do you think were some turning points in the work that we were doing, for the last 15 years? Like what were some key things that happened in social justice that affected the work we were doing?
You mean things that happened in the world, or how sort of things that we were doing that sort of took us to the next place?
Either one. I'm not going to narrow your answer.
Okay. I think there were a number of sort of benchmarks along the way. One of the first was when we first started doing, way back in the day, sessions around unconscious bias, we'd have to spend an hour just convincing people that they actually had a bias and that there was a possibility that everything in there that they did was not in their conscious control. So just getting to that point. And when we could, stop spending so much time doing that, that sort of liberated us to really go more deeply and to explore things. I think when we started really doing a lot around white privilege, and we started doing entire sessions just around that, that kind of was a shift as well. And then when we started saying, this is what everybody else is doing, but, we were constantly evaluating the impact of what we were doing on different kinds of audiences. And when we realized that a lot of our presentations, even though we're trying to move towards racial equity, were rooted in whiteness, that was a huge turning point as well.
I just want to point out the original iteration that we were working with and from, we did not develop. And so if you're saying what we were trying to do was from a white perspective, even though we were trying to address racism, then those folks actually gave us a white package. So
they did,
right? And we kept working within it, right? Because that's what our organization wanted to do. I think a turning point was when a couple of turning points. I think one for me was working in Inglewood, and when we kept having these really frustrating conversations with all people of color in the room about racism, using the same white-based training materials that we were using. And when you and I were like, gosh, they just don't get it. And then it hit us when we were like, we're doing the same thing. That, no, we don't get it. It's our material. It's our system. Yes. It's not those people of color didn't get it. And I think that was a huge turning point. It was a huge turning point. Because then we realized you can't take this to every single group and expect that you're going to have the same outcomes and the same understanding and the same perspectives. So I think that was one for me. And that's when we really started doing the work of unpacking whiteness, really looking at white default, and on a personal and a professional level, trying to liberate ourselves from that narrow definition and moving and not be limited by the default of whiteness in society. That we started taking not only our professional work, but our personal lives, that we don't have to conform to that. That causes some problems in our relationships, didn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it did. So that to me was a keynote, I think, in our relationship and relating to one another. Because even though you're white, I'm Black, we were on the same path that looked different, but on the same path, and our significant others didn't get it. No. Right? No. They were trying to, I think, on their behalf, but one of the reasons they didn't get it is we weren't really good at expressing this I wouldn't say turmoil, but this transition that we were in. And I don't know if I could still explain it other than using the term that I used back then, which was divorcing whiteness. That if I was going to go out and talk about addressing racism in a white way, that makes me a hypocrite. And how am I going to personally go on a journey of divorcing this thing called whiteness, and the ways that I perpetuate whiteness, and then still be able to address racism? So I think for me, not only was that a major turning point in our relationship, but I think it was a major turning point in the way that I see this work, period. In my attitude, it was really emotional, transitional time, but it really was probably the most liberating, one of the most liberating acts I've probably done in my life. So what was most liberating about it for you? This unapologetically addressing anti-Blackness, right? That I had to get to a point where it seemed like in our sessions, I was almost apologizing for being Black and addressing Black issues for years. And so the big liberation was I was doing it, and I didn't care about white fragility. I didn't care about any of that stuff. I started letting all that go. And it was just liberating. I wasn't coming out of these sessions with big headaches and stuff like that. I mean, we're still touched by the stories and stuff and emotion that we hear, but I wasn't coming out with this it was like I was constantly being subjected to high blood pressure and stress and all that for hours during the day, for 6 to 7 hours back to back of this high levels of stress. And so I think this transition liberated me from all of that. Even in telling some of the emotional stories that I tell, it does not seem the same. It doesn't impact you the same as it used to. The same. Yeah. No. Yeah. That was a big thing. How about you? When being socialized white in this country, some of our early questions that we kind of asked ourselves in order to unpack this thing about whiteness, because it always goes so unnamed. It just is. It's just, it's all around you. It's the water that you swim in. And so, for me, one of the early questions that we asked is, well, who would I be if whiteness wasn't, the norm, wasn't the standard, what are the possibilities? And that was a hard road to go down, because it was like, well, but, even in terms of all of my ancestry, at least that I know of, I wouldn't be that much different. I mean, I only know the water I'm in, I am that fish in the water, and all there is whiteness. I didn't have, my family came to this country so many generations ago. I don't even have, cultural traits from European countries to draw upon, right? Or if they're still present. That old phrase, Heinz 57, that white people use, older white people use. Thank you. But yeah, and so
so, what does that mean for me then to do something like divorce whiteness, right? And so I went through all of this journey of thinking, well, I'm always going to be perceived as white and have the privileges associated with that, the blind spots associated with that in this country. But what does that mean for me to work towards even some of these concepts of decolonization? Mm-hmm. And one of, for me, it's meant that, I can look to other ways of being. I can look to cultures that are different from mine and find so much value in that I can center that in my life without feeling like I have to somehow make it assimilate into what I know to be normal. Mm-hmm. So it's been a lot more challenging process. It also has meant for me that, while you're liberated from white fragility and things like that, for me, I've actually taken on an ownership of the fact that, white people are my tribe, right? Mm-hmm. If we're going to dismantle racism, a system that benefits whiteness, then white people have to play a role in dismantling that. So at the times where you're like, I'm just not going to deal with that fragility, I feel obligated that I have to, or that I should, because quite frankly, if they aren't going to, they're not going to hear it from you. Mm-hmm. They might hear it from me. Mm-hmm. And if I have a chance, then I have to work with my community, right?
So are you divorced? Do you have your papers?
It's a different thing.
I think I am divorced from whiteness. I think my divorce is different from yours.
Yes.
In that if we were to equate it to an actual divorce, I think my divorce would have been with someone I didn't have kids with. Mm-hmm. So there's no attachment ever again. Whereas your divorce is with someone you had kids with, where you'll always somehow
some connection
have some connection to what you're trying to divorce. So I think we can both have divorces. They would just be very different.
Yeah, because it's not a matter of, giving up culture, if you will. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of not making my culture the norm, the automatic, to open myself up to so many other possibilities in my interactions with other folks, but also in terms of how I can pursue life, and I'm not talking about like cultural appropriation where people just pick up on a little thing and take it out of the context of a culture. I'm literally thinking about, concepts like healing. We talk about racial healing a lot, which our country doesn't do. And other countries have gone down that journey of intentionally working towards healing, right? So being able to think about, well, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for our country? So it just, it's a different path.
What do you think is the difference between when we do our sessions, we hear a lot of people talking about, gosh, I wish I was alive during the civil rights movement. That seems like such an important time in our country. I wish I was alive. And they don't realize what's happening now, right? So what do you think is the difference in terms of racial equity or racial justice between the civil rights movement and all that's happening now?
So I think that there's in the civil rights era of the 60s and 70s, you didn't have everything filmed and put out there immediately, right? So social media has certainly changed awareness for some folks. Now, even up until George Floyd's, assassination, essentially, people, whenever they saw these videos, could still stay within their own mindset. They saw what they wanted to see that supported their belief systems, whatever that may be, right? But that actually forced people to question some things. And so what I see differently now is more of a questioning of the system. You see that especially among younger folks, not willing to say, let's let go slow and steady, or, in time, or, it's better than it was. But it's like, no, it's messed up. Change it now.
I think there's some significant differences between the civil rights movement and now. And I think that was a civil rights movement. I think what we have now is a human rights movement.
Human rights movement. Yeah.
I don't think we got to the human part because we were so, and people don't know that there's a difference between the two. I think in terms of the work that we've been doing over the time that we've worked together, is that people are noticing that there's more to us than just race.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I don't mean to diminish racial experiences and oppression at all. I'm saying that I think that there's a conversation in the Black community that racism looks different for me than it does for a Black male.
Mm-hmm.
That racism looks different for a Gen Z person
mm-hmm.
than it does for me. That sexual orientation,
mm-hmm.
it has widened in that conversation as well, and gender identification in terms of racism,
Mm-hmm.
that someone who appears to be gay and Black and female receives a different type of racism than I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're understanding, getting back to tribes, that we're starting to understand the tribes a little more. And so I'm looking at more and more white people say things I've never heard before. I have white people that are strangers have come up to me, especially when they have asserted their privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And they notice they've done it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, in particular, one gentleman actually come back, and he didn't know what to say. He just said, I don't know why I just jumped in front of you. I don't know why I felt entitled to do that. He was painfully apologetic. And he just said, I just want you to know I'm sorry. Because he had actually left and came back and he said, well, I'm sorry. And I didn't say, well, because it's white. You're white. I just took his apology because you could see it was heartfelt. But I'm not sure if that would have been caught in the 60s.
No.
Right?
I think there was also this notion that laws were changed, and so therefore things were fixed.
Yes.
And of course, laws can be changed back. And, that's happened quite a bit to a lot of the laws that were passed back then. But I think also what's different is I think there was, particularly for people who identify themselves as white liberals, white progressive, that they intentionally put themselves in that kind of category, that they were blind for a long time. So because they were liberal, because they were progressive, they voted a certain way, they had certain belief systems that mattered to them, that things were good, right? Rather than being able to see, yes, but I work with an institution, I work within a system, and that upholds racism, because racism is built into the very fabric of our society. And so I think what you see different is people going, yeah, maybe I'm part of the problem. I may not be completely the solution.
I think there's some things that still remain for me in my observation, particularly white people, that there's a group of whites in this country still that, as long as they aren't rich or wealthy, they work hard every day, they are automatically good. Like the foundation of America is them. And challenges to that gets protected, whether they're liberal, conservative, whatever, because white liberals do this as well. And they protect that very white foundation of, I can work hard and someday be a millionaire or a rich person or whatever. That sort of dangling of the carrot that the marketing of America does, particularly to middle class and poor white people. But I still see that. I still see a strong holding on to, to that. So, even in the stimulus checks that we're giving out, I'm seeing all sorts of comments, even on social media, about, oh, these lazy people are out there getting all this money.
Yes.
You make like $200,000 a year and you're worried about the waitress who's getting an extra $600.
Yes.
Right? That is a problem in America. And I noticed for the most part, there's that group. It's not all white people. There's a certain group of white people that hold dear that they're not wealthy, so they're not participating in all of the evils of capitalism. They work hard, so they deserve everything they have. And that if you don't do it like they did it, you're not a real American, or you're not a good American type of thing. And it's like, I'm automatically good because I'm that. Because I get up and go to work every day, I'm automatically a good person. And they don't want to challenge the fact that you can have simultaneous things, that they are working hard, that they have done all these things. At the same time, they have at least white social privilege that has helped them to do all this hard work, right? So I still see that is the same.
You know, the marketing of our country runs really deep, and it's not just marketing to everyone where else in the world. It's marketing to us in terms of, you know, this philosophy about our country, an inability to sometimes look critically at our country and say, yeah, the way we started is pretty messed up. Why would we assume that just all went away because we passed a law here or there? And so, you know, and this notion of being a good American and all of that, and what that means to be patriotic, that somehow you can't then complain or want to fix challenges. Oh, and we have a guest. Come on.
Sorry, folks.
This is Chug. Chug is happy.
Okay, Chug. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, Chug, you. Okay. But where was I even? Come on, Chug. Yes. Right. It was very nice to see you. Now you can leave.
So, you were talking about how sort of the marketing of this, of the marketing of America sort of maintains this level of whiteness that even, you know, white liberals don't know how to break through.
Well, I mean, some of those concepts just run so deeply into our psyche about who we are as Americans, right? And even who is American and who's not American. And those messages about what that means for us in this country and in the world just run so deep, and sometimes it's hard to question them because you see them reinforced everywhere, right? And nobody wants to think badly about themselves, I mean, or the country that they're from. I mean, you know, it's okay to be patriotic, and it is okay to recognize that there's some messed up things that need to change.
And thinking about the previous work that we were doing, and, you know, we left the job that we met and created Tribesy, a consulting firm around social justice, DEI, organizational development. What was significant in that transition for you?
The actual transition, or why we changed?
The actual transition.
You know, there was a freedom of doing things differently that it took me a minute to grab a hold of. Right?
Be careful what you ask for, right?
Yeah,
because we got it. And now what?
And now what? But it's exciting. It's fun. There's a sense of control. There's also a sense of freedom to be able to do the things that we know. We've done so many things over the decades, right? That we've learned a lot of things along the way. We know the things that, you know, are just, you know, the hamster in the wheel kind of thing. And so to be able to do things in a different way it took a second to grab a hold of that, you know, that I had the option to do that.
When I think about this question, I think about the significance of what we experienced last night. So we've been working with a client for some years now that finally laid some foundations and had some difficult conversations. And with all of our clients, there's some people who want to go fast and do this now, and there's some people who want to go slow, and we recommend some place in the middle. And this group ended up following everything that we recommended to do. And in doing that, they had a historic win last night. And as I was listening to it, first of all, we were caught surprised by the fact that they were going to have this adopted into their organization. But I think for me, the validation that this work can happen, this work can be done, this work can, you know, that we as Americans, this racism thing is not unsurmountable.
No.
Right? That this can be done, and it can be done by large, because it's a pretty large organization. You know, it can be done by large organizations as well. That for me is part of this this thing that we did, right? This thing that we did that we knew deep down how to address racism. We knew it was an easy answer, just not an easy, it's just not easy for people to do.
Right.
But it's an easy answer. And so that for me is part of like our transition. So,
when people go on this journey, there comes that point where you realize the degree to which isms are institutionalized, right? And that then becomes this overwhelming thing. What can I do as one person, which is then rooted in that individualism notion. But one of the things in terms of last night in the win is, yeah, you actually can change organizations. You can. And not just, you can change them culturally, you can change them structurally. And yes, you can begin to dismantle those aspects that uphold racism.
Well, with that, we're going to leave it on that note that you just left there, that it can be done. Thank you for listening in to Tribesy Talk. Join us for episode 2, where we're going to talk about the black and white of it. And it is isms today. So join us next time, and we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.